listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast, a show by personal trainers for personal trainers. It's time to become a better trainer, get more clients, and change more lives.
Hello, Coach Alex here, back with Fitness Mentors for part 2 of our podcast with Dr. Chad Waterbury on dissecting the squat. If you missed the first part of this series, absolutely go back and watch it. We dove into the anatomy of the squat, how to program it for clients, how to regress and progress the squat, and really laid a really solid foundation for this part 2, which is diving a lot deeper into squat variations and how do you work the squat into a client's program safely and effectively, and how do you take in the information that you get from your client to prescribe them the appropriate squat variation or even squatting at all. So we also get into a lot of question and answers from the audience, which is really awesome in this episode, and kind of wrap this whole conversation up with Dr. Waterbury. So let's dive in to part 2.
Smith machines as a to perform the back squat, is it viable to start them on the Smith machine first?
Was that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the question's for me.
Yes,
please.
Okay. All right. So I'm trying to think of an instance where it would be necessary to start with a Smith machine squat, and I just cannot think of any. So can you? Well, I'm sure. You can. I just wouldn't do it that way. I would, again, start with a goblet squat, and if they're really uncomfortable from the squat position, I'd have them sit on a box or straddle a bench or whatever. I have yet to work with anyone, and I've worked with some very, very low functioning older people when I was doing my doctor of physical therapy, and I have yet to have one person, this is just me, this might be some out there, who was incapable of doing that, of sitting down to a box or a bench or a chair, holding a weight in front. And that's just a more appropriate movement pattern. From my standpoint, it is more functional. We throw around the word function all the time, but it's a pure squat pattern. It's like you were saying, Alex, early on in this, you'd rather have someone perform a squat while holding on to something instead of regressing it to where it wasn't a squat, like a leg press or whatever. And I agree with that 100% if we're talking about building the squat. So the same thing, it's like the whole fixed axis of the Smith machine, it's fixed in one plane, and you can, all you have to do is, you don't need balance or anything hardly to push it up and down, stand up and down. And to me, I just think there's a better way. I just think there's a more better carryover into the real world, a more functional way to do it. And I would do it with a weight in front, goblet position, and then sitting back into a box or a bench. I've not had to regress any more than that, at this point, unless we're talking about someone who's so immobile because of an accident. It's a whole nother story, and that's a different topic altogether. Yeah, I wouldn't use the Smith machine. It's not, it's not terrible, it's not bad.
The person asking the question said something about dorsiflexion problems. That's what they said. They were using the Smith machine. Mm-hmm.
So same thing. They can have no dorsiflexion. And in fact, sprinters, by the way, this is a whole nother topic. Elite sprinters have virtually no dorsiflexion. They need super stiff ankles to run that fast. So you can do a perfect goblet squat sitting back into a box or a bench and have zero dorsiflexion. So it's just, you're really going to sit back. It's going to be a lot of hip activation. Your trunk's going to really come forward, which is fine. As long as the spine is neutral and straight, all that's fine and good. So I would do that instead of the Smith machine.
Cool. And that's it. Those are the questions.
Yeah. I will say, one of my clients is my grandma, who I've mentioned a couple times, in her mid 80s. She broke her femur 5 years ago. We do goblet squats down to a bench, and now she's a badass. So keep that in mind. But, I can personally attest to, we also haven't had to regress. Now, when she was rehabbing from the femur break, like Chad said, completely different story. And she was in a rehab center for that. She wasn't working with me. But when she was back to working with me, we were essentially, I mean, we didn't use weight for the first little bit, but that movement, we were able to maintain throughout. And obviously, you know, maybe the bench was a little bit higher to start, but we still stayed with that movement. So just a little personal experience that can attest to that too.
Awesome. Kudos to her. Good work.
So awesome, right? Yeah. She's in the hospital, she was the type, or they would tell her like, you're probably never going to walk without a cane again, blah, blah, blah. And just none of those things has happened. She's back to walking without a cane much sooner, working out, mentally great, still living on her own, you know, so she continuously defies expectations. And I think that's a testament to she's worked out. She's lifted weights most of her life and even into her old age. And so she was doing things in rehab that were blowing the minds of people. And because she had such a strong foundation.
To me, that's so much more rewarding helping someone like that than even, you know, helping some super pro athlete do whatever it is they need to do. That's the stuff that matters. So
for sure.
Hats off to you. I'm not wearing a hat.
Totally.
If I had a hat, I'd tip my hat to you.
I will send that to her as well, but yes, thank you.
All right. Awesome.
And sometimes she watches these and I don't tell her when I mention her, and she sends me a very excited text that I made it into the end. So hopefully
getting famous, getting internet famous. Exactly.
She has an Instagram, so I'll drop that in the chat. Okay, let's really briefly, we're going to wrap things up here. Just talking about form really briefly. I know we've kind of talked about a lot, and hopefully now you're in the perspective of, you know, there's so many variations. You have to look at each person individually, but we wanted to think about, are there high level universal form considerations that are going to make a squat, and are there things that are pretty much universally bad to do? And I think we've about covered them there. And of course, Chad, I'll go to your perspective momentarily, but and I can't stress enough, these are general, right? You know, if these aren't most of the time, this is going to be the case 100% of the time, and you never want to consider anything outside of these, probably not, you know, but do take these as general rules. In general, feet shoulder width apart is a good starting point. Sometimes a little bit more narrow or a little bit more wider. A little bit more wide is going to be beneficial. And often a slight outward foot stance is generally most comfortable. I'm curious why that is, Chad. I know when I was first getting into lifting, there was very much feet pointing forward, everything pointing forward, feet shoulder width. And if you had an offset stance or if you had an outward lean, that tried to get corrected. And it almost seems like now in the last, and maybe just because I'm more in the industry, but even the last 5 years, 7 years, there's been so much more information around actually all these different squat variations are okay. Why is that? And why is the outward stance completely okay from a foot position perspective?
So just to be clear here, if we're on a glass floor and these are the bottom of my feet, talking about turning the feet outward. Okay. That's what we mean by this slightly outward foot stance. So that's how I interpret that.
Yes.
So the reason why virtually everyone is going to be more comfortable, well, not the vast majority is going to be more comfortable and be able to squat deeper with better form with that position. It just has to do with the skeletal structure of the head of the femur and how it goes into the pelvis. And I'm not going to get into all those, but essentially what happens is when you rotate your feet out, you open the hips more. There's less tissue and bone obstruction. So if your feet are really narrow and you try to squat and your feet are straight ahead, most people, the femur is going to really run into the pelvis very quickly. And you can stretch all day long. It won't matter. It's bone hitting bone. It's when you rotate the feet outward, it just opens up the hips more. That's just the simplest and best way to think about it. And, you know, most people know this anyway. They try it. You can try it at home. You can see with various clients or whatever. If you say, okay, I'm going to have you squat. Don't worry about load or anything. It's like, what do you think is the most comfortable stance? What do you feel like is the best stance that you're going to be able to squat with the best form? Most people, their feet are going to be wider than shoulder width, slightly wider, and their feet are going to be angled out slightly. Again, it just has to do with the way most of us, the head of the femur, the neck of the femur goes into the pelvis, the acetabulum. So
Yeah.
that's what's generally considered the go-to position.
Makes sense. And in a similar vein, how do you, I actually find my most comfortable squat stance are my feet are slightly offset. Do you see that as okay? Is that, inherently something is imbalanced inside of me that's causing that needs fixing? Or is that
I would try to fix that. I have that's a new one for me. So you're saying like your left foot is slightly in front of your right or vice versa.
Like slightly. Like an inch or two. But I just notice when I feel, we don't need to get in this personal thing, but maybe other people are thinking this. When I make them perfectly even, that feels slightly offset to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure you have something with your pelvis, some rotation going on, imbalance between your left and right side and all that. But yeah, that's not ideal. That's something that I would try to correct.
Perfect. Great. All right. So as with many exercises, you want to maintain stability and control throughout the squat. I don't often do this with my clients, but a cue that I'll often say to them to try to get this, because oftentimes when you say maintain control, be stable, that's tough. Like there's not a lot of tangible things for your clients to do. In order to do that, sometimes I'll say, if I snap my finger and tell you to stop at any point during the movement, you should be able to stop. You should feel like that you have control. You're controlling the weight through the entire time. The work's not being done by gravity. You're not just letting the weights fall. You feel like you have a grasp and control over the weight the whole time. In a similar vein, you're able to maintain, a strong core and a flat back. Things that obviously, if the back isn't flat, you will see that. It's very common to see people at the bottom of a squat, as soon as they start that upward motion, the first thing that happens is their back rounds. It's often going to be weak core. And I'm curious, Chad, one, anything to add to that? Two, do you have any opinions on the Valsalva maneuver, holding your breath during the lift, pros and cons of that? Because I know that's a technique oftentimes to create a stable core and have that internal wall.
That intra-abdominal pressure is very important. You want to have it be as high as possible. So how you do that is you're not sucking in, you're not pulling your belly button in, you're doing just the opposite. You're pushing out. So you're bearing down and really pushing out. This is when sometimes a belt, like an old school weightlifting belt, can be helpful because it gives them tactile feedback to learn to push out against. And then I would wean them off the belt. But that's often, if you feel like they're not understanding what you're saying, then they get that tactile feedback. And you can say, like they had the belt on and like they stick their fingers down between the belt and your sides and say, okay, try to smash your fingers. That whole feeling of pushing out against the belt, especially on the sides and the low back and all that, not just pushing out in front, like you're trying to make a bigger stomach. You'll expand your midsection everywhere, but you want it to be 360 degrees, not just pushing out in front. You want to really think of bearing down and trying to push the sides outward. Sounds weird, but when you give them tactile feedback and they put their fingers between, the side of the torso and the belt and say, try to smash your fingers on each side. That's very helpful. So want to have intra-abdominal pressure because that's what's going to support the spine. When you lose that, that's when bad things happen.
And you use the belt as a tool if someone is struggling to create that pressure without the belt. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, guys. I mean, a belt is not used because your lower back hurts and you want it to feel better. I mean, that's a slippery slope.
Yep. True.
Which it's very common. It might even feel good, but it's not a Band-Aid to fix poor form or to support your back that's hurting. That can be yeah, that can be a slippery slope. And lastly, we've talked about this already, but you want to keep the weight distributed in the arches and heels of your foot. Very, very common for the heels to come off the ground as you're squatting, the weight to shift forward. You'll often see the knees come over the toes, which again, as Chad mentioned, is not inherently bad. It is often a sign that in a lot of clients, that the weight is moving forward as opposed to sitting back in the heels. We've talked about introducing a box squat or something of that nature to help get that feeling of having your weight back in your heels, and sitting down without something behind you. That can be a really tough confidence thing sometimes for people to do that. I'll sometimes start with a chair, something that they're very familiar with, just to get used to that, because it's almost like we are understandably, we don't want to fall. And when we sit back and there's nothing behind us, there's this mental barrier oftentimes. So if you have a client who is struggling with that, that can be a good tool to utilize. Is there anything else, Chad, that you might utilize or might look at if someone's weight is consistently shifting forward in their squat?
It's just like you said, it's usually just a cueing issue. So I've already mentioned the dorsiflexion. A lack of dorsiflexion will make you shift too much forward and all that, but it's usually just, you need to give them confidence, give them something to sit on, really cue them to push their hips back and drive, keep the weight distribution through the arches, through the center of the foot, and maybe slightly back into the heels. But if you just say the heels, and sometimes they do too much in the opposite direction. So it's just good to keep it through maintain your arch and keep your weight distribution through your arches, as you're going down, then as you're driving up through the arch and maybe a little bit through the heel.
Perfect. Yeah. Really good point.
Somebody was
Awesome.
asking about plates under the heels. How do you like that, or no, Chad?
Well, there's a couple different ways I can answer that. One is it's totally fine to squat with plates under your heels. That's totally fine. But the way I look at it is, if the plates are under the heels because of lack of a dorsiflexion, I'm going to focus on fixing the dorsiflexion, assuming that can be fixed. I have a patient who I work with who has fused ankles, and she won't ever be able to get adequate dorsiflexion because of the fusion she had to have for various surgeries. So in that case, like, elevating the heels is a really good thing for her, but I'm always going to try to fix the problem. So it's fine to do it temporarily, but I would focus on trying to fix the dorsiflexion so the person does not need the plates under the heels. But from like a bodybuilding standpoint, putting the plates under the heels is great if you want to get some more quadriceps activation, because it's going to allow you to have more forward knee travel, keep your torso more vertical, and that's just good for emphasizing the quadriceps. So it's like most questions that we always go back to. Well, you rarely hear me say something is inherently good or bad or always or never. It's just, it depends on what you're after. And there's an example I gave where it could be good. Or it's like, we don't want to just put a Band-Aid on it. We want to be sure we correct the dorsiflexion if that's possible.
Cool. Good deal.
Which is a perfect representation of why this field is both a science and an art, in my opinion.
For sure.
Were we up to speed on questions there?
Yeah. And it's
perfect.
3:06. So also just.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go over these guys.
We don't keep Chad on for the next 4 hours.
We told Chad that we were going to finish on time, that we're going to try because it's a short presentation. But I think we knew deep down what was going to happen.
It never happened.
Which I also did try to say too. So yeah, I mean, so what we taught today was so many different principles. They can manifest in different ways. We actually talked about a lot of these variations today. I'm not going to dive super deep into them from a time perspective. You'll get the recording. If you want to learn more about one specifically, ask us right now, or send us an email at absolutely any time, and we're happy to help. This has been a really awesome chat. Again, if you want to learn more about Chad's work, Elite Physique, Huge in a Hurry, when it comes to books, he has a website, which is chadwaterbury.com. And his Instagram as well. I think that was your Instagram, or was that your Twitter? No, it was your Instagram.
Yep.
If you want to keep in touch with him, and if you Google his name, you will find more ways to keep in touch as well. Yes. Is there anything I missed there, Chad, about how someone can reach you, ask you questions, if they would like to, or are those the spots?
No, that's it. You can go to my website. You can, Elite Physique is my latest book. Instagram is at Dr. Chad Waterbury. Before we jump off here, Alex, I want to touch on a point you just said, because it was such a great point. The last thing you said was training, because these are personal trainers out there, or aspiring personal trainers. And you said it's an art and a science. And I will say this, in your younger years, you focus so much on the science, and that's good, but you think it's about science, and you need to have a good foundation of understanding. But the longer you do this, you realize that art becomes way more of a factor than you ever would have guessed. It's how you adapt your personality to the person. It's how you tweak little things here and there and get creative. All the stuff they don't teach you in the science part. That's what makes a very successful personal trainer, and that's what will give you longevity with your clients and have a lot of satisfaction, is that whole art. And the art is you could write a book about it, but I just want to touch on that. Very
100%.
smart point you made.
Well, thank you. Yes. I mean, even with my students at MPTI, I mean, this is why at Fitness Mentors, we are so focused on building a career as a personal trainer, which includes, the science side of things. 100%. You have to be a good practitioner. You have to have the knowledge. But the soft skills and how to communicate, and do you have empathy, and are you able to, help someone reframe a negative perspective? Are you good at, are you trustworthy? Are you good at adapting on the fly? Things that are really tough to learn in a science textbook, which is, again, exactly what we do at Fitness Mentors, but it plays such a huge role in your success. I mean, if you are top scientist and you know everything there is to know about programming in the body, but you don't know how to communicate, and you're not really personable, and you struggle to relay those traits to your clients, that will be a barrier for you.
It'll be
there's no doubt about that.
Huge barrier. The thing, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to say here, and this all comes back to motivation too. Motivation is a whole science in itself. And there's 3 aspects of motivation. I call it the ABCs of motivation. It's autonomy. Someone, they feel like they have some say in what goes on. Belonging, they feel like they're part of something good. And competence, that they feel competent, that they can do what you're asking them to do. And that's really, really important, because you could, as you said, be the smartest programmer in the world, but if you don't know and understand how to motivate someone, and it's going to be different for everyone, then you're gonna have a tough time. So you got to really, know how to keep people motivated.
Totally. Because everyone's there's times everyone wants to quit. There's times that everyone is sick of it. They don't want to come back, and if they see you as just, oh, this is my trainer and it's me versus them, and whatever, like that's only going to last so long. That natural motivation from an individual is only going to last so long. And it is up to us to nurture that and feed that back to them when they don't have it. And we're on their team, and we have to make sure that they know that, and things of that nature. So yeah, thanks for touching on that, Chad. It is huge. It is the other half of it, maybe more than half. if I always say putting percentages on things, but it's such a critical part of it. Last question for you, Chad, is in addition to your own, of course, are there any people or resources or books or blogs or literally anything at all that you utilize for your own development and learning that you'd like to share?
Well, this is to the point that we were just talking about, as a perfect segue. I tell people this all the time. So I'll give a seminar, or at the end of my class or whatever, someone will come up and say, what's a book that I can read? Like, I want to be a great strength conditioning coach or trainer or whatever. And I know that they're expecting me to say, oh, The Science and Practice of Strength Training by Vladimir Zatsiorsky or whatever. They're expecting me to say something like that. And I say, right, it's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That is probably the most valuable book you can read if you want to be a personal trainer, because at the end of the day, Alex, you said 50% or whatever. I would say it's 100%, because it doesn't matter how great you are at programming, coaching, whatever. If you are not someone that people want to be around, they're not going to keep using you. It's as simple as that. And the How to Win Friends and Influence People is just a great reminder of just getting out of your own head and letting the person speak, and letting we always want to say, here's my opinion, this, that, whatever, but people want to be heard. They want to be heard, and you don't want to be the one who's often just driving the whole conversation. That's a spoiler alert about that book, by the way. That's one of the main characteristics that they want you to learn. It's the guy tells a story, Dale Carnegie, about, well, he's interviewing famous people who give him this advice, but the story that I love, that's so true, is this person meets someone at a party and says, this person is trying to build his network. He meets someone at a party, and he knows it's good to ask people about their kids, right? So he's like, okay, I'm going to ask this person about their kids. Oh, how are your kids doing? Tell me about your kids. Like, oh, little Jimmy's in soccer, and Susie's playing piano, and yada, yada, yada. And they're doing this and they're doing that. And this person, rambles on for like 10 minutes, talking all about the kids. And the guy who, set this up says, okay, it's nice to meet you, I got to go. And the next day, that woman who's talking about her kids was like, oh, it was so great meeting him. We had such a great conversation, and all this. And no, he just let her talk, about what she wanted to talk about. And you're just a good listener, and you're making sure that you keep the topic on point. If someone loves golf in a personal training session, ask that person about golf. They'll talk for 15 minutes straight and think they're having a great conversation with you. Little things like that make a huge difference in life, because your network is your net worth. I know that's been said a million times, but you got to be a good people person, build a great network. That's what's going to give you success. It really is who you know in this world. And be good to people and build a great network, and everything else will fall into place.
Sage advice. Could absolutely not agree more. And be curious too. As you were talking, Chad, I was just like, I was trying to think of so much of what is at the root of that. And I think curiosity is huge, and empathy. Because also we can think, how do we want to be talked to when we're in a conversation? Do we just want to listen to someone talk about themselves and lead the charge? Of course not. We want people to ask us about ourselves too. And so return the favor. Yeah, could not agree more. Thanks for that point. How are we on questions? I see the chat is continuing to rise, but
we're all good. Everyone's just saying thank you. They said that it was incredibly informative. And thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, to wrap it up, guys, obviously we didn't want to make this a main point of the webinar, but our mission at Fitness Mentors is to help you, the personal trainer, build a career that is beyond just being a good programmer and being a good science. That's quite literally what we do. We did not plan to get into that, but so if we have absolutely a host of courses, we do have a coupon code as well for people who are in this webinar, specifically webinar 25. If we can be of any help at all, if you want more structured guidance around any of this, we have a one-on-one business mentorship as well. We can work with you personally. We really do want to help. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Let us know what questions you have. If we can answer a question about one of our courses, or about our mentorship, or you're not sure what you need, but you need something and you think maybe we can help, please just let us know. We are always happy to help, whether it's a product of ours or just having a conversation with you. So please don't hesitate to do that, and absolutely use this code as a thank you for attending these webinars. Well, we did it. It was awesome. Chad, thank you again. This was awesome. Sorry again for going over, but
No
I warned
problem.
you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for joining
Great group
us,
of people
Chad.
here. It's my pleasure. Thanks
you.
for having me.
And definitely would love to keep in touch, maybe have you back on at some point down the line. Our people seem to absolutely love this. And like Sam said, I was also listening and learning heavily during this as well. So I was like, oh crap, I have to go back and lead this thing. I wanted to just be a student selfishly as well. So there's so much just really awesome information, a lot of good nuggets.
Yeah, you're really tempting me when we start talking about mentioning the deadlift. It's like, There's so many things I want to say about that point, but I'm like, no, we got to keep it on the squat. We can do
I
it.
know.
We can finish with the squat without getting on the deadlift because there's so many things I wanted to share with that.
That's why I started it and I was like, no, I'm not going to say it, even though I said it. I literally had to, apparently. But I was just like, it's not even worth opening that door. And if we're all caught up on questions, I think we are all set. And hope it's a really great year for everybody. And our door's open for absolutely anything. So reach out anytime. To you, Chad, and to everyone watching.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Great one.
Perfect.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. Great crew.
As always, thanks for listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast. You can learn more about fitness mentors at fitnessmentors.com. Be sure to share this podcast on social media. And remember, we are here to help you succeed.